Tonight, we step into the heart of ancient Rome, where sand, steel, and spectacle collided in one of the most brutal yet captivating traditions of the ancient world, gladiatorial combat. For centuries, gladiators have fascinated us. They are immortalized in movies, books, and legends as fearless warriors who fought for survival and glory. But who were they, really? Were they all slaves, doomed to die for the entertainment of the masses? Or were some of them celebrated champions, gaining fame, fortune, and even freedom? In this episode, we will journey into the arenas of ancient Rome, exploring the origins of gladiatorial combat, the grueling training these fighters endured, and the different types of gladiators who stepped into battle. We'll also take you inside the grand arenas, most famously, the Colosseum, to witness what a typical day at the games might have looked like. We will meet some of history's most famous gladiators, from the rebellious Spartacus, who defied Rome, to legendary fighters who won their freedom. And finally, we'll explore how this bloody spectacle came to an end, and how the legacy of the gladiators still lives on today. Gladiatorial combat is often seen as a defining feature of ancient Rome, but its origins stretch back further than the grand spectacles of the Colosseum. To understand how this brutal tradition began, we must first look beyond Rome itself, to the mysterious and ancient civilization of the Etruscans. The Etruscans, who flourished in Italy before Rome's rise to power, had a deep connection to rituals surrounding death and the afterlife. Among their many customs was a practice known as munera, or funerary games. Unlike later Roman spectacles, these early contests were not meant for mass entertainment but were instead somber, sacred events. The belief was that spilling blood at the funeral of a nobleman could honor the deceased and perhaps even appease the gods. Inscriptions and artwork from Etruscan tombs depict armed combatants engaging in duels, watched closely by priests and mourners. But where did the Etruscans get this idea? Some historians believe they were influenced by the Samnites, a fierce warrior people of southern Italy, or even by the Greeks, who staged their own athletic contests to honor the dead. But there was one key difference. Greek competitions, such as the Olympic Games, were meant to showcase skill and athleticism, while Etruscan contests often resulted in death. These were not sporting events but sacrificial rites, performed with deep religious significance. The transition from religious ritual to public spectacle happened slowly. The first known Roman gladiatorial combat was held in 264 BCE, and it was not staged in a grand amphitheater but in the Forum Boarium, a cattle market in Rome. This event was organized by the sons of Junius Brutus Pera, a Roman nobleman, to honor their deceased father. Instead of simple offerings or a grand feast, they decided to hold a munus, a combat between three pairs of fighters. Though small in scale, it marked the beginning of a tradition that would soon captivate the Roman world. At first, these combats remained tied to funerary rites. Wealthy families used them to demonstrate both their status and their respect for the dead, and the games were held in open forums, surrounded by temporary wooden seating. But as Rome grew, so too did its appetite for blood sports. By the late 3rd century BCE, Rome's wars of expansion were bringing in thousands of prisoners of war, many of whom were forced into combat as gladiators. The growing number of enslaved fighters allowed the games to expand beyond funerary contexts and become a form of mass entertainment. No longer just private affairs, the spectacles now took place in front of larger and larger crowds. The shift was driven in part by Rome's rulers, who saw the games as a way to appease the restless population. In 216 BCE, during the Second Punic War, Rome suffered one of its worst military defeats at the hands of Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae. The devastation was so great that Rome's leaders sought ways to lift public morale. That same year, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus organized a massive gladiatorial event, featuring 22 pairs of fighters. It was still framed as a funeral rite, but by then, the line between sacred ritual and public entertainment had blurred significantly. Over the next century, the games became a political tool. Wealthy politicians and generals realized that hosting grand spectacles could boost their popularity. By the late Republic, figures like Julius Caesar and Pompey used gladiator games to win the favor of the people. Caesar, in particular, was known for his extravagant displays, once staging 320 pairs of gladiators in a single event. He even built temporary wooden amphitheaters to accommodate the growing crowds. This transformation also saw the rise of permanent arenas. Before, gladiator fights had been held in markets, forums, or temporary structures. But as demand grew, Rome needed dedicated spaces for its blood sport. By the time of Emperor Augustus in the 1st century BCE, the first stone amphitheaters were being built. These structures allowed for larger, more elaborate spectacles, complete with elaborate underground chambers for staging surprises, wild animals, mechanical lifts, and even flooding the arena for mock naval battles. The gladiatorial games had now fully transitioned from ritual to entertainment, from private honor to public spectacle, from a funerary tradition to a political weapon. What had started as a solemn tribute to the dead had become a cornerstone of Roman popular culture, one that would persist for centuries to come. Gladiators are often thought of as little more than slaves, thrown into the arena with no choice but to fight for survival. But the reality of who became a gladiator was far more complex. They came from many different backgrounds, some were prisoners, some were volunteers, and a few were even high-born men who willingly stepped into the sand for fame and fortune. Their lives were brutal, but they were also admired, feared, and in some cases even celebrated like modern athletes or celebrities. So who were the men, and occasionally women, who risked everything for the bloodthirsty cheers of the crowd? For the majority of gladiators, the arena was not a choice, it was a death sentence. Many were slaves, taken from conquered territories across the Roman Empire. Rome's expansion brought in a constant stream of captives: Gauls, Thracians, Germans, Dacians, Carthaginians, Greeks, Egyptians, and more. These men were often fierce warriors in their own right, taken in battle and forced into servitude. Instead of being executed outright, some were sold to gladiator schools, where they would become tools of entertainment for the Roman elite. Prisoners of war made for ideal gladiators. Many of them were already trained fighters, veterans of their own armies who knew how to wield a sword, spear, or shield. Their natural aggression and battle instincts made them valuable commodities. Some were forced into combat as punishment for resisting Roman rule, their suffering turned into a public spectacle. Others were criminals, sentenced to death in the arena. But not all condemned criminals became gladiators. There was a distinction between those given a gladiatorial fate and those sentenced to pure execution. Those who were sent into the arena with no training and no armor, simply to be slaughtered by animals or more experienced fighters, were known as noxii. They were not considered gladiators in the true sense but were instead victims of the blood sport. For criminals deemed physically strong enough, however, there was a different path. They could be sent to a gladiator school, given training, and then expected to fight. If they survived long enough and proved themselves, they could even earn rewards or freedom, though the odds were slim. Surprisingly, not all gladiators were forced into the arena. Some chose to become gladiators voluntarily. These men, known as auctorati, were often free citizens, sometimes even of noble birth, who signed contracts to fight in the games. Their reasons varied. Some did it out of desperation, others out of ambition. One of the most common reasons was financial hardship. In Rome, debt was a crushing burden, and bankruptcy often left people with few options. A free citizen could sell himself to a ludus in exchange for money, effectively becoming a slave under contract. Once signed, there was no turning back, they had to fight. Some saw it as an opportunity to make a fortune. Gladiators who became popular could win gold, prizes, and sponsorships from wealthy patrons. Others volunteered for fame and glory. The Roman world admired strength, endurance, and combat skill. To fight in the arena and win was to earn immense prestige. Even members of the equites and senatorial families were known to step into the arena not out of necessity, but out of sheer thirst for recognition. The Emperor Commodus, for example, fought as a gladiator purely for sport, even though the matches were often staged. For some, the arena was a path to military service. The Roman army valued men with combat experience, and gladiator training was as rigorous as it got. Some men signed up for the games, knowing that survival and skill could lead to recruitment into elite military units, such as the Praetorian Guard or the personal guard of an emperor. Regardless of how they got there, all gladiators faced a harsh and brutal existence. Life in a gladiator school was not unlike that of a prisoner. They lived under strict discipline, with harsh training regimens, minimal personal freedom and constant danger. Gladiators were owned by lanisti, gladiator trainers who ran the schools like military camps. A new recruit, known as a novitius, had to undergo months of brutal training before he was deemed ready to fight. Training was relentless, involving hours of weapon drills, combat techniques, endurance exercises, and conditioning. They learned how to use different weapons and shields, how to anticipate an opponent's moves, and how to put on a good show for the crowd. Gladiators were not given complete armor, like soldiers, because the Romans wanted the fights to be spectacular. They had to fight with limited protection, which meant even minor wounds could become fatal. Despite this, they were not expected to die in every fight. The idea that every battle ended in death is largely a myth. A trained gladiator was valuable, and his owner did not want to lose an investment too quickly. However, death was always a possibility. Even with good medical care, gladiators had access to some of the best doctors and surgeons of the time. Many succumbed to their injuries. If a gladiator was severely wounded in battle, his fate often rested in the hands of the editor, the sponsor of the games, or even the emperor himself. If the crowd deemed the fighter worthy, he might be spared. If not, he would be finished off, usually with a fatal stab to the chest. Gladiators occupied a strange place in Roman society. They were both admired and despised. On the one hand, they were heroes, strong warriors who embodied the Roman ideals of bravery and endurance. The best gladiators became celebrities, with fans following their careers, painting their images on walls and even carving their names into everyday objects like lamps and cups. Wealthy women were notorious for falling in love with gladiators, and some gladiators even had affairs with aristocratic ladies, much to the outrage of their husbands. On the other hand, gladiators were still seen as lowly and dishonorable. Most were slaves, criminals, or outcasts, and even the volunteers who willingly became gladiators lost their social status by doing so. Roman senators and nobles looked down on them, considering them little better than animals. They could be famous, but never truly respected. Despite this contradiction, some gladiators did achieve freedom. If a gladiator survived enough fights and won the favor of his owner, he could be granted a rudis, a wooden sword that symbolized his release. A freed gladiator could retire, become a trainer, or sometimes even re-enter society as a citizen. But the lure of the arena was strong, and some continued to fight even after earning their freedom. Though rare, there were female gladiators, known as gladiatrices. They were often seen as novelties rather than serious combatants, but they did exist. Some were likely slaves, while others were noble women seeking thrill or defying norms. The most famous record of female gladiators comes from a relief showing two women named Amazon and Achillea, who fought each other to a draw. Over time, as Rome's tastes changed, women gladiators were banned by Emperor Septimius Severus in 200 CE. Gladiators were far more than just warriors thrown into an arena. They were prisoners, soldiers, slaves, volunteers, celebrities, and outcasts, all bound together by the brutal, unforgiving world of gladiatorial combat. Some sought freedom, others sought glory, and many simply fought because they had no other choice. The arena sand may have been soaked with blood, but they also bore the footprints of men and women who, for a short moment, stood as legends. The gladiatorial games were not chaotic free-for-alls. Every match was carefully designed for balance, spectacle, and strategy. Gladiators were divided into specific classes, each with unique armor, weapons, and fighting styles. The matchups were not random. Each type of gladiator was typically paired against an opponent with contrasting strengths and weaknesses, creating dramatic and suspenseful battles. Let's take a closer look at some of the most famous and recognizable gladiator types who stepped onto the sands of the arena. 1. Murmillo, the classic heavyweight. The Murmillo was one of the most iconic gladiators, often referred to as the standard Roman gladiator. Heavily armed and slow-moving, he relied on strength, endurance, and defensive tactics. Armor and weapons. A large rectangular shield, scutum, similar to what Roman legionaries used. A short sword, gladius, designed for thrusting rather than slashing. A distinct helmet with a high crest shaped like a fish, symbolizing the sea god Neptune. Metal greaves, shin guards, and an armored sleeve, manica, to protect his sword arm. The Murmillo fought defensively, using his large shield to block attacks before launching short, powerful thrusts with his sword. His heavy armor made him slow, but it also allowed him to absorb blows that would have been fatal to lighter gladiators. The murmillo was almost always paired against the thrakes or the retiarius, two gladiators who had much lighter armor and relied on agility to counter his brute strength. 2. Thrakes, the agile warrior. The Thrakes, or Thracian, was named after the warriors of Thrace, a region in modern-day Bulgaria and Greece. He was smaller, faster, and highly mobile, often relying on speed rather than brute strength. Armor and weapons. A small, curved sword, sicca, designed to slash around an opponent's shield. A small rectangular or round shield, palma, much smaller than the murmillos. A crested helmet with a wide brim and a visor, offering excellent head protection. Heavy shin guards, archria, to defend against low attacks. Fighting style. The Thrakes was an aggressive skirmisher, constantly moving, dodging, and attacking at unexpected angles. His curved sword was perfect for hooking around the enemy's shield to land cuts and thrusts in vulnerable spots. Thrakes gladiators were most often pitted against the murmillo, creating a battle between speed and power. 3. Secutor, the shielded pursuer. The secutor, meaning chaser or pursuer, was a specialized variant of the murmillo, specifically designed to fight the retiarius. His entire armor was crafted to counter the net and trident fighter, making him one of the most unique gladiators in the arena. Armor and weapons. A short gladius sword, ideal for close combat. A large scutum shield, just like the murmillo. A rounded, smooth helmet with tiny eye slits, designed to prevent a net from catching onto it. Arm and leg guards for additional protection. Fighting style. The secutor's goal was to chase down his opponent and engage in close-quarters combat before the retiarius could use his net and trident. However, his helmet was his greatest weakness. Its small eye slits severely limited his vision, making it difficult to track fast-moving opponents. The retiarius, creating one of the most dramatic and dynamic matchups in the gladiatorial arena. 4. Retiarius, the net fighter. The retiarius was one of the most recognizable and unusual gladiators, fighting without a helmet and using weapons unlike any other combatant. Instead of a sword and shield, he relied on a trident and net, making him a true specialist in the arena. Armor and weapons. A weighted net, used to entangle and trip up opponents. A long trident, used for stabbing from a distance. A dagger, pugio, as a backup weapon if his net and trident failed. Very little armor, just a metal arm guard, manica, and a shoulder guard, galerius. Fighting style. The retiarius was the ultimate skirmisher. His lack of armor made him extremely fast, allowing him to dodge and weave around heavier opponents. He would first attempt to trap his enemy in his net, and if successful, he could either stab them with his trident or trip them for an easy kill. If his net missed, he had to fight carefully. His trident was effective from a distance but useless up close. The secutor, whose armor and helmet were specifically designed to counter the retiarius. This matchup was one of the most popular in the Colosseum, pitting agility against brute force. 5. Hoplomachus, the spearman. The hoplomachus was inspired by the Greek hoplites, the heavily armed spearmen of classical Greece. He combined offensive reach with solid defense, making him a highly skilled and strategic fighter. Armor and weapons. A long spear, asta, ideal for keeping opponents at bay. A small dagger as a secondary weapon. A small round shield, similar to a Greek hoplites. A tall crested helmet with a full-face visor. Metal greaves on both legs for protection. Fighting style. The hoplomachus fought by keeping his opponent at a distance, using his spear to stab and control space. If his opponent got too close, he would switch to his dagger for fast, deadly strikes. His small shield meant he had to rely more on footwork and agility, rather than blocking attacks. The hoplomachus was often paired against the murmillo, creating a classic spear versus sword battle. These were some of the most common and famous gladiator types, each bringing a unique fighting style to the arena. Battles were carefully arranged to create dramatic, high-stakes encounters, ensuring that no single class had a clear advantage over the others. But these were not the only gladiators who fought in the Colosseum. In the next section, we will explore the more specialized and exotic gladiator types, including beast hunters, charioteers, and even rare female warriors who stepped onto the sands of the arena. While the classic gladiator types, Murmillo, Thrax, Secutor, Retiarius, and Hoplomachus, were the main attractions of the arena, there were also more specialized and exotic warriors who fought under unique circumstances. Some of these fighters faced wild animals, while others fought in groups, on horseback, or even from chariots. These rare gladiators added variety and spectacle to the games, making each event unpredictable and thrilling. Let's explore some of the most unique and specialized gladiators in ancient Rome. 1. Bestiarius, the beast hunter. Among the most dangerous roles in the arena was that of the bestiarius, the gladiator who fought wild animals. Unlike standard gladiators, who faced human opponents, the bestiarius had to battle ferocious beasts, including lions, tigers, bears, elephants, leopards, wolves, and even rhinos. Armor and weapons. Bestiarii were lightly armed, if at all. Some wore no armor to allow greater speed and agility. Weapons varied depending on the opponent, including spears, whips, daggers, and swords. Some fought with nets and tridents, similar to the retiarius. Fighting style. Bestiarii were not traditional gladiators, they were trained animal hunters and executioners, often seen as lower in status than standard gladiators. Some were criminals sentenced to face animals as punishment, while others were skilled warriors who trained specifically to fight dangerous beasts. Unlike human duels, these battles were less about strategy and more about survival. The bestiarius had to outmaneuver the animal, using its instincts against it. Some fights were staged as elaborate hunts, with gladiators cornering and killing animals in groups, while others were one-on-one duels against deadly predators. Famous example. Emperor Commodus was said to enjoy fighting as a bestiarius, often killing animals in the arena to impress the crowds, though his fights were staged and heavily in his favor. 2. Equites, the mounted gladiators. The equites were gladiators who fought on horseback, offering a unique style of combat rarely seen in standard duels. Their battles were often staged as chariot races or cavalry duels, resembling military battles more than traditional gladiator contests. Armor and weapons. A light spear or javelin for mounted combat. A gladius sword as a secondary weapon. A light, open-faced helmet, different from the heavy helmets worn by foot gladiators. A small round shield, allowing for better mobility on horseback. Fighting style. Equites typically began their fights on horseback, using javelins to attack their opponents from a distance. If both gladiators survived the mounted phase, they would often dismount and continue fighting on foot. These matches were considered more ceremonial than deadly, and equites gladiators were often more respected than other fighters, as they had to be highly trained in both horsemanship and combat. Equites usually fought against each other, rather than facing standard gladiators. Their matches were about skill and precision, rather than brute force. 3. Esidarius, the chariot gladiator. Inspired by the Celtic charioteers who once fought against Rome, the Esidarii brought wheeled warfare to the gladiatorial games. They were less common than other types, but their matches were among the most spectacular. Armor and weapons. A chariot pulled by 2 horses. A spear or javelins for ranged attacks. A gladius sword for close combat if forced to fight on foot. A helmet with a distinctive design, often inspired by Celtic or Gallic warriors. Fighting style. Esidarii fights were fast-paced and highly theatrical. Gladiators would circle the arena in their chariots, hurling javelins at each other while trying to outmaneuver their opponents. If a chariot was damaged or overturned, the fighter would have to continue on foot, making the battles unpredictable. These matches often recreated famous battles, giving the Roman audience a taste of warfare within the arena. 4. Dimachus, the dual-wielding gladiator. The Dimachus was one of the most aggressive and highly skilled gladiators, wielding 2 swords simultaneously instead of using a shield. His style was deadly but also highly risky, as he had no defensive equipment. Armor and weapons. 2 gladi, short swords, or curved daggers. Little to no armor, relying entirely on speed and skill. A simple helmet, sometimes without a visor. Fighting style. The Dimachurus was a relentless attacker, striking with both hands simultaneously in rapid, unpredictable movements. His style required incredible dexterity, as he had to dodge instead of blocking attacks. Due to his lack of defense, he was highly vulnerable to counterattacks, meaning he had to defeat his opponent quickly before fatigue set in. Dimachuri were often paired against heavily armored opponents, such as murmillos or secutors, to create an intense contrast between offense and defense. 5. Gladiatrix, the female gladiator. Though rare, female gladiators, known as gladiatrices, did exist. They were seen as curiosities rather than standard fighters, but their appearances in the arena were always major attractions. Armor and weapons. A gladius sword or curved dagger. A small shield for defense. Sometimes bare-chested, wearing only a loincloth and greaves, for theatrical effect. No helmets, so their faces remained visible to the crowd. Fighting style. Gladiatrices fought similarly to their male counterparts, though their fights were often staged as special events, rather than regular matchups. They were sometimes paired against dwarfs or wild animals, emphasizing the Roman love of the bizarre and exotic. However, there were also genuine female versus female gladiator fights, proving that women could be just as fierce in combat as men. Famous example. A famous Roman relief depicts two female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea, who fought so well that their match was declared a draw, a rare honor in the gladiatorial world. These rare and specialized gladiators added variety, spectacle, and innovation to the games. Whether they were beast hunters, mounted warriors, dual sword fighters, or even female combatants, each type brought something unique to the blood-stained sands of the arena. Their battles were not just about survival, they were about entertainment, strategy, and spectacle, designed to keep the Roman audience captivated and hungry for more. But what was it like to actually step into the arena? The roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, the scent of blood and sweat hanging in the air. Gladiatorial arenas were more than just battlegrounds, they were theaters of death and triumph, carefully designed to maximize spectacle and audience engagement. These arenas ranged from small provincial amphitheaters to the Grand Colosseum in Rome, each constructed to ensure that every fight was as thrilling as possible. But these structures were more than just stages for combat. They were architectural marvels, equipped with elaborate underground chambers, intricate trapdoors, and even mechanisms to stage mock naval battles. Let's step inside these ancient arenas and uncover the secrets of where gladiators fought, how these arenas were built, and the technology that made the games even more spectacular. The Colosseum, the grandest arena of all. No discussion of gladiatorial combat is complete without mentioning the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum. Built in 72 to 80 CE under the emperors Vespasian and Titus, it was the largest amphitheater ever constructed, capable of holding 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. A masterpiece of Roman engineering. The Colosseum was a technical marvel, designed for efficiency and spectacle. Its elliptical shape allowed for clear sightlines from every seat, ensuring that no spectator missed the action. It was built with concrete and stone, making it one of the most durable structures of its time. The seating arrangement reflected Roman society. The emperor, senators, and elites sat in the front rows, closest to the action. Equites, knights, and wealthy merchants sat in the middle sections. Common citizens, freedmen, and women were pushed to the upper rows. Slaves and the poor were either at the very top or outside the amphitheater. The Colosseum had 80 entrance arches, allowing thousands of spectators to enter and exit in minutes, a design so advanced that modern stadiums still use similar principles. The Hypogeum, the secret world beneath the arena. One of the Colosseum's most impressive features was its underground network, known as the Hypogeum. This two-level labyrinth of tunnels and chambers housed holding cells for gladiators and animals before their fights. Trapdoors and elevators, operated by pulleys and counterweights, used to suddenly release animals, gladiators, or props onto the arena floor. Storage areas for weapons, props, and equipment. These hidden mechanisms allowed unexpected surprises, like wild animals suddenly emerging from the ground, enhancing the drama of the games. While the Colosseum was the most famous, it was far from the only gladiatorial arena in the empire. Rome had dozens of amphitheaters, and many Roman provinces had their own regional colosseums, where local governors staged games to maintain order and entertain the people. Lesser-known but impressive amphitheaters. Capua Amphitheater, second only to the Colosseum in size, Capua's arena was home to one of the most famous gladiator schools, where Spartacus trained before leading his rebellion. Amphitheater of Nimes, France, built during the 1st century CE, it is one of the best preserved Roman arenas today. Amphitheater of Pompeii, one of the oldest known Roman amphitheaters, built before the Colosseum, with seating for 20,000. Pompeii's volcanic ash preserved many graffiti messages from spectators who supported their favorite gladiators. El Gem, Tunisia, a massive amphitheater in North Africa, showing that gladiator combat extended even beyond Italy. These regional arenas often staged similar spectacles as Rome but on a smaller scale. Gladiator fights were not random duels, they were elaborate productions, planned in advance to ensure maximum entertainment. The arena was designed to enhance the drama in several ways. 1. The arena floor and its modifications. The sandy floor, called the arena, which gave arena its name, was raked smooth between fights to cover up the blood. Some games featured elevated platforms, obstacles, or staged ruins to create more dynamic battles. Some emperors even had the arena flooded to create mock naval battles, though this was more common in temporary wooden amphitheaters rather than the Colosseum itself. 2. The use of special effects. Romans loved spectacle, and some games included smoke and fire effects to make battles seem more dramatic, hidden doors and mechanical lifts, allowing animals or gladiators to appear suddenly, exotic decorations, such as golden sand, painted backdrops, and artificial scenery, crowd participation and the emperor's role. A gladiatorial fight was not just a duel, it was an interactive experience. The Roman audience played a crucial role in deciding the fate of the combatants. If a gladiator was wounded and could not continue, the editor, the host of the games, often the emperor, would ask the crowd for their verdict. The audience would respond with hand gestures. Thumbs up, pollice verso, did not mean spare him, as Hollywood suggests. Instead, it often meant to finish him off. A closed fist or waving of cloth was a plea for mercy. If the editor chose to spare the fighter, he would be given medical treatment and a chance to fight again. If not, the victor would deliver the final blow. The emperor or high-ranking officials could override the crowd's decision, depending on political motives. Some emperors, such as Commodus, would even step into the arena themselves to engage in staged fights for public amusement. For Romans, the arena was more than just a battleground, it was a symbol of power, order, and control. The games served several social and political functions. Entertainment for the masses, a way to distract the population from economic hardship or political instability. A display of Roman strength, the ability to control and execute prisoners or wild beasts symbolized Rome's dominance. A political tool, hosting grand games could boost a leader's popularity or win over the public. Some emperors, like Augustus and Trajan, used gladiator games to reinforce their image as strong, just rulers. Others, like Nero and Commodus, indulged in them for personal vanity. By the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire was changing. Gladiatorial combat began to decline due to Christianity's growing influence, which opposed the games. Economic decline, which made funding expensive games difficult. Shifting public tastes, as chariot racing and theatrical performances became more popular. The last recorded gladiator combat in Rome took place in 404 CE, after Emperor Honorius banned the games following the intervention of a Christian monk named Telemachus, who was killed trying to stop a fight. Though the arenas eventually fell silent, their legacy remains. The Colosseum still stands, not as a place of violence, but as a testament to Rome's architectural and engineering brilliance. Today, it attracts millions of visitors each year, a monument to a time when life and death played out before an audience of thousands. For the people of ancient Rome, gladiatorial games were not just an event, they were a full-day spectacle, filled with violence, pageantry, and grand displays of Roman power. From the moment the sun rose over the Colosseum to the final bloody duel of the afternoon, the games followed a carefully planned schedule, designed to keep the audience entertained and emotionally engaged. Let's take a walk through a typical day at the Games, experiencing it as a Roman citizen would, from the early morning preparations to the thrilling grand finale. Morning, the opening ceremonies and wild animal hunts. As dawn broke over Rome, tens of thousands of spectators would flood into the Colosseum, eager to claim their seats. The atmosphere was electric, with merchants selling food and souvenirs, street performers entertaining the crowds, and gamblers placing bets on the upcoming fights. Before the Games began, an opening procession, pompa, would take place. This was a grand parade featuring the editor, the sponsor of the Games, often an emperor or politician, seated in a place of honor. The gladiators, marching in formation, dressed in their armor and displaying their weapons. Musicians playing trumpets and horns, adding to the excitement. Priests performing rituals to honor the gods, especially Mars, the god of war. Once the procession ended, the first event of the day began, the venations, or wild animal hunts. The morning was dedicated to beast hunts, featuring professional bestiarii, animal hunters, or condemned criminals sent to their deaths. The Romans imported exotic animals from all over the empire, turning the arena into a hunting ground where lions, tigers, bears, elephants, leopards, crocodiles, and even rhinos were set loose. Skilled bestiarii would battle the animals with spears, nets, or tridents. Some animals were forced to fight each other, creating gruesome spectacles. Criminals sentenced to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, were thrown unarmed into the arena, their deaths serving as gruesome entertainment. The crowd cheered wildly as beasts lunged, blood spilled, and the sands turned red. These hunts symbolized Rome's dominance over nature, showcasing its ability to tame and control even the most ferocious creatures. Midday, public executions and dramatic deaths. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, the Games took on a darker tone. The midday period was reserved for executions, often carried out in theatrical, gruesome ways. This was when the condemned, prisoners, slaves, or enemies of the state were put to death in public spectacles designed to maximize audience engagement. Forms of execution. Gladiator-style duels. Untrained criminals were forced to fight each other to the death, with the winner often executed anyway. Damnatio ad bestias. Prisoners were tied to stakes or left defenseless as wild animals were released upon them. Crucifixion. Occasionally, criminals were crucified in the arena, dying slowly as the Games continued around them. Mythological reenactments. Condemned prisoners were forced to play roles in staged mythological scenes, where their deaths were real. For example, a prisoner might be burned alive while playing Hercules on his funeral pyre. For Romans, public execution was a form of justice and a reminder of state power. It was not just about punishment, but about entertainment, spectacle, and control. After the executions, the arena floor was cleaned and prepared for the main event, the gladiator battles. Afternoon, the main event, gladiator duels. As the sun began to set, the true stars of the Games stepped onto the sand, the gladiators. This was what the audience had waited for, and the tension in the Colosseum was palpable. Before combat began, the gladiators saluted the emperor or editor, often with the famous phrase, Ave, Caesar, morituri te salutant, Hail, Caesar. Those who are about to die salute you. Though not all gladiators died in combat, the phrase captured the high stakes of their battles. The fights were carefully planned, with matchups designed for maximum entertainment. Pairings were rarely random. Gladiators were matched to create contrasting styles. Murmillo versus Thrax, strength and defense versus speed and agility. Secutor versus Retiarius, the heavily armored chaser versus the quick, net-wielding fisherman. Hoplomachus versus Murmillo, spear and small shield versus Gladius and large shield. Each battle lasted until one gladiator was too wounded to continue or was killed outright. If a gladiator fell but was still alive, the editor, sometimes guided by the crowd's reaction, decided his fate. The role of the crowd in life or death decisions. If a gladiator was seriously wounded, the audience played a crucial role. They would shout and gesture. Turning the thumb upward, pollice verso, meant death. The victorious gladiator would finish his opponent. Clenching the fist with the thumb tucked in was a plea for mercy. Ultimately, the editor made the final call. If a gladiator had fought bravely, he might be spared to fight again. If he had been cowardly, he would likely be killed for dishonoring the arena. The aftermath, victory and defeat. At the end of each fight, the victor stood tall as the crowd erupted in applause. He would be awarded a palm branch, symbol of victory, gold coins, prize money, a laurel crown, if he had performed exceptionally well. If a gladiator survived long enough and won enough battles, he could even earn his freedom. A freed gladiator was awarded a rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing his release from servitude. As for the fallen, their bodies were dragged from the arena by slaves dressed as Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, reinforcing the game's connection to Roman mythology and death. As the sunset painted the sky red, the games came to an end. Thousands of spectators left the Colosseum, exhilarated, entertained, and perhaps even numb to the sheer brutality they had just witnessed. For Romans, the games were more than just violence, they were a symbol of order, power, and civilization. The empire's might was displayed not just on the battlefield but in the ability to control life and death for public amusement. But as the centuries passed, and Rome's power began to decline, so too did the games. The sands of the arena would eventually grow quiet, the Colosseum would crumble, and gladiators would become legends. Yet their legacy remains. Even today, the image of the gladiator endures, a symbol of courage, endurance, and the deadly spectacle that once captivated the greatest empire on earth. The life of a gladiator was one of violence, discipline, and constant danger, but was it always as short as many believe? The common perception is that gladiators died quickly, with every match being a fight to the death. However, the reality was more complicated. Gladiators were valuable investments, and their owners did not want them dying unnecessarily. While some fell early, others survived for years, earning fame, fortune, and, in rare cases, even freedom. So what determined the lifespan of a gladiator? What happened when they retired, and how did society view them once they left the arena? Let's explore the real life expectancy, survival rates, and the ultimate fate of Rome's warriors. How long did gladiators actually live? Despite the common belief that gladiators had a life expectancy of just 1 or 2 fights, historical evidence suggests that many survived for years, and some even fought in dozens of matches. Historical records and tombstones indicate that the average career length of a gladiator ranged from 3 to 6 years. Some gladiators lasted even longer, fighting in over 30 or 40 battles before retiring. Others perished quickly, either from a severe wound in their first fight or from infections that followed their injuries. Factors that determined survival. Skill and training. Well-trained gladiators had a better chance of surviving multiple fights. Type of gladiator. Heavily armored types like the Murmillo and Cicuta had better protection and often lasted longer than lightly armored fighters like the Retiarius. The crowd's reaction. If a gladiator fought bravely, he was more likely to be spared after a defeat. The sponsor's decision. The editor of the games could grant mercy or demand death. Luck and opponents. Facing a more experienced or ruthless opponent could mean a shorter career. Survival did not mean a life free of suffering, however. Even if a gladiator lived through multiple matches, he was often scarred, wounded, or crippled by years of fighting. One surprising fact about gladiators is that they had access to some of the best medical care in the Roman world. Owners had a financial incentive to keep their gladiators alive, so they employed skilled medici, doctors, who specialized in treating combat wounds. Medical treatments for gladiators included surgical procedures to remove arrows, mend broken bones, and stitch wounds. Herbal remedies to prevent infections. Specialized diets to promote healing and maintain muscle strength. Hot and cold therapy to reduce swelling and pain. In fact, some Roman medical advancements, such as bone-setting techniques and wound cleaning methods, were developed or refined in gladiator schools. However, even with good medical care, a severe infection, deep stab wound, or internal injury could still end a gladiator's career or life. Retirement. Could gladiators ever escape the arena? If a gladiator survived enough fights and impressed his owner or the public, he could be granted freedom. A freed gladiator was awarded a rudis, a wooden sword that symbolized his release from servitude. Some retired gladiators went on to live relatively peaceful lives, while others found that leaving the arena was not so easy. What happened to retired gladiators? Some former gladiators became doctors, trainers, passing on their knowledge to new recruits. Their experience made them valuable teachers, and they were often respected within the gladiatorial community. Bodyguards and enforcers. Retired gladiators were highly skilled fighters, making them ideal for work as bodyguards, mercenaries, or even hired muscle for wealthy Romans. Some were employed by emperors as personal guards. Returning to the arena. Not all freed gladiators stayed away from combat. Some voluntarily returned to fight as veteran warriors, either because they loved the thrill of battle or because they needed money. Others were forced back into combat due to financial struggles. Death in poverty or obscurity. Freedom did not guarantee a good life. Some gladiators ended up destitute, unable to adjust to life outside the arena. Society often looked down on them, considering them dishonorable despite their fame. The social status of gladiators, admired yet despised. Gladiators lived in a strange dual world of fame and disgrace. On one hand, they were treated like heroes and celebrities, people cheered for them, bet on their fights, and even painted their images on walls and vases. Some gladiators had fan clubs, with supporters carving graffiti messages such as Saladus, the heartthrob of all the girls, onto Roman walls. Wealthy women were rumored to be infatuated with gladiators, even bribing guards to sleep with them. Some gladiators were even offered sponsorships, much like modern athletes. Yet, despite their popularity, they were still seen as outcasts in Roman society. Gladiators were legally considered infames, a category of people who were dishonored and lacked full citizenship rights. Even famous gladiators were not allowed to hold public office or marry noblewomen. They were often compared to prostitutes and criminals, despite their bravery. This contradiction, being both worshipped and despised, meant that many gladiators never truly escaped the stigma of their profession, even if they survived and gained freedom. The ultimate fate of gladiators: death in the arena or a forgotten life. While some gladiators won their freedom and lived to old age, most were not so lucky. The majority died in the arena, either through combat, execution, or injuries sustained over time. Even those who survived long careers often met tragic ends. Some were forced back into slavery due to financial troubles. Others became political pawns, used by emperors or senators and later discarded. A few were even assassinated or executed, especially if they gained too much power or influence. Only a select few managed to carve out successful post-gladiatorial lives, becoming trainers, businessmen, or even legends remembered long after their deaths. The life of a gladiator was a constant battle for survival, not just in the arena, but in Roman society itself. Some were lucky enough to win their freedom, while others were doomed to die for sport. They were warriors, entertainers, slaves, and celebrities all at once, living on the edge of glory and destruction. Their legacy has endured for centuries, shaping modern ideas of heroism, endurance, and the ultimate cost of fame. Today, we remember the gladiators not just as fighters in the sand, but as symbols of strength, perseverance, and the brutal spectacle of ancient Rome. While most gladiators lived and died in obscurity, a few rose above the blood and sand to become legends. Some were celebrated for their unmatched skill, others for their defiance against Rome, and a select few became symbols of rebellion, endurance, or sheer spectacle. Their names echoed through history, immortalized in Roman records, inscriptions, and later, in myths and Hollywood adaptations. Let's explore the lives of some of the most famous gladiators, the warriors who defied the odds and became legends. 1. Spartacus, the rebel gladiator. No gladiator is more famous than Spartacus, the Thracian warrior who turned from a slave into the leader of the largest slave rebellion in Roman history. Spartacus was likely born in Thrace, modern-day Bulgaria, Greece. He may have been a soldier or mercenary before being captured by the Romans and sold into slavery. He was sent to the gladiator school in Capua, one of the most notorious training camps in Italy. The Gladiator Rebellion, 73 to 71 BCE. In 73 BCE, Spartacus and around 70 fellow gladiators staged a daring escape from the gladiator school. They seized kitchen knives, overpowered their guards, and armed themselves with real weapons from a nearby armory. What started as a simple breakout soon became a full-scale slave uprising. The rebel gladiators defeated Roman forces and grew their numbers to over 70,000 escaped slaves. They fought using guerrilla tactics, using knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the Roman legions. For 2 years, they ravaged Italy, defeating multiple Roman armies. However, in 71 BCE, Rome sent its greatest general, Marcus Licinius Crassus, to crush the rebellion. Spartacus' army was finally defeated in southern Italy. Spartacus himself was likely killed in battle, though his body was never found. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning to future rebels. Despite his defeat, Spartacus became a symbol of resistance, inspiring countless stories, books, and movies, including the classic Spartacus, 1960, and later adaptations. 2. Flamma, the gladiator who refused freedom. While most gladiators dreamed of freedom, Flamma, a Syrian gladiator, did the unthinkable. He refused it, not once, but 4 times. Flamma was a secutor, a heavily armored gladiator specializing in close combat. He fought 34 recorded battles, an incredible number for a gladiator. His record was 21 wins, 9 draws, and 4 losses, an astonishing survival rate. A man who chose the arena. Flamma was granted the rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing freedom, 4 times, yet he always chose to return to the Colosseum. Whether he loved the thrill of battle, enjoyed the fame, or had no life outside the arena remains unknown. He died fighting at the age of 30, a seasoned veteran of the sands. His tombstone bears the words, Flamma, secutor, lived 30 years. Fought 34 times. Won 21, lost 4, fought to a draw 9 times. Despite being offered freedom 4 times, he refused it. 3. Crixus, the gladiator general. A companion of Spartacus, Crixus was a Gaulish gladiator who became one of the key leaders in the Gladiator rebellion. Crixus was likely a Thrax, a fast, lightly armored gladiator. He was known for his ferocity and hatred of Rome. Unlike Spartacus, who wanted to march out of Italy, Crixus preferred to stay and sack Roman cities. This disagreement led to him splitting from Spartacus' army with 30,000 warriors, but it proved to be a mistake. In 72 BCE, his forces were ambushed and slaughtered by Roman legions. In his honor, Spartacus executed 300 Roman prisoners as a revenge offering. Crixus' story is often overshadowed by Spartacus, but he remains one of the most famous gladiators in history. 4. Priscus and Verus, the only gladiator match that ended in a tie. One of the most legendary fights in gladiatorial history occurred in the Colosseum during the reign of Emperor Titus, 80 CE. Priscus and Verus were 2 evenly matched gladiators, known for their skill and endurance. They fought a long and brutal battle, refusing to surrender. The fight went on for so long that both warriors became too exhausted to continue. The crowd was so impressed by their skill that they demanded both be spared, a rare honor in gladiator history. Emperor Titus granted both men their freedom, awarding them the rudis. The Roman poet Martial recorded their story, ensuring their names would live on. 5. Commodus, the emperor gladiator. While most gladiators were slaves or volunteers, one man fought in the arena who was neither, the emperor Commodus himself. Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, ruled Rome from 180 to 192 CE. He was obsessed with gladiatorial combat, personally stepping into the arena hundreds of times. However, his matches were rigged, his opponents were often unarmed or weakened before battle. Despite the staged nature of his fights, Commodus claimed he was Rome's greatest gladiator, even renaming Rome Colonia Commodiana in his own honor. He was so delusional that he dressed as Hercules, wielding a club and lion skin. His behavior eventually led to his assassination in 192 CE. He was strangled in his bath by his wrestling partner, Narcissus. Commodus remains one of the most infamous figures in Roman history, his life dramatized in movies like Gladiator, 2000. The gladiators of Rome were more than just fighters, some became symbols of rebellion, courage, and endurance. Their stories have lived on for centuries, shaping how we see honor, sacrifice, and heroism. Spartacus led a rebellion against Rome. Flamma chose the arena over freedom. Priscus and Verus showed skill so great, they were both spared. Commodus turned the games into a twisted personal obsession. Their names may have been written in blood on the sands of the Colosseum, but their legends have survived for over 2,000 years. For centuries, the gladiatorial games were at the heart of Roman entertainment, drawing crowds in the tens of thousands to witness brutal battles, heroic duels, and grand spectacles. But by the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the roar of the Colosseum began to fade. The once thriving world of gladiators slowly disappeared, buried beneath the weight of economic struggles, political changes, and shifting moral values. So what led to the end of the gladiatorial games? How did a tradition so deeply ingrained in Roman culture vanish after centuries of bloodshed? Let's explore the fall of the gladiators and the events that sealed their fate. 1. The economic burden of the games. At the height of the Roman Empire, gladiator games were lavish, state-sponsored spectacles, funded by emperors, senators, and wealthy patrons. However, by the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the empire was struggling with serious economic problems. Why did the games become too expensive? The cost of gladiators, training and maintaining gladiators was expensive. Owners had to pay for weapons, food, medical care, and housing, which became harder as the empire's economy weakened. The expense of the arenas, the Colosseum and other amphitheaters required constant maintenance, and many local cities could no longer afford to fund large-scale events. Fewer prisoners of war, gladiators were often captured warriors from Rome's conquests, but as Rome's military power declined, so did its supply of fresh fighters. With fewer resources and rising costs, many local games were shut down, and even the Colosseum saw fewer gladiator contests. 2. Changing public taste. The rise of chariot racing. By the late Empire, gladiatorial combat was no longer the #1 attraction. Another sport had taken center stage: chariot racing. The Circus Maximus, Rome's grand chariot racing stadium, could hold over 250,000 spectators, dwarfing the Colosseum's capacity. Chariot racing was just as intense and competitive but lacked the moral controversies of gladiatorial bloodshed. Unlike gladiators, charioteers could become incredibly wealthy, attracting a massive fan base. As Roman culture evolved, chariot racing and theatrical performances gradually replaced the once dominant gladiator games. 3. The influence of Christianity. One of the biggest factors in the downfall of the gladiatorial games was the rise of Christianity. As Christianity spread throughout the empire, its values clashed with the brutality of gladiator combat. Roman society, which had once celebrated violence as entertainment, now began to see the games as barbaric and sinful. Key Christian opposition to the games. Christian leaders condemned the games as inhumane and immoral, discouraging believers from attending. Emperors who converted to Christianity began restricting the games, favoring less violent forms of entertainment. The idea of glorifying death for sport was directly opposed to Christian teachings about the sanctity of life. One of the most significant moments in the decline of the games occurred in 404 CE, when a Christian monk named Telemachus attempted to stop a gladiator fight in the arena. According to legend, Telemachus jumped into the Colosseum, begging the crowd to end the bloodshed. The enraged spectators stoned him to death, but his sacrifice shocked Emperor Honorius. Soon after, Honorius issued a decree banning gladiator contests, marking the official end of the games in Rome. Though gladiatorial fights may have continued in some provinces for a few more years, 404 CE is generally regarded as the end of gladiator combat in the empire. 4. The fall of Rome and the abandonment of the Colosseum. The final blow to the gladiator games came with the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire. By the 5th century CE, Rome was no longer the mighty empire it once was. Invasions by Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, weakened Roman control. The economy collapsed, making funding gladiator fights impossible. The Western Roman Empire officially fell in 476 CE, marking the end of Roman rule in the West. With Rome in ruins, the Colosseum and other amphitheaters fell into disrepair. The once great arenas were abandoned, stripped for building materials, and left to decay. The Colosseum became a quarry for stone, its grand arches and seats used to build medieval churches and palaces. Over time, earthquakes, looters, and nature reclaimed the structure, turning it into a shadow of its former glory. By the Middle Ages, the Colosseum was no longer an arena of death, it had become a symbol of a lost empire, a ruin standing silently over the city of Rome. 5. The legacy of the gladiator games. Though the gladiators themselves disappeared, their legend lives on in modern culture. The Colosseum remains one of the most visited landmarks in the world, drawing millions of tourists each year. Gladiator stories have inspired books, movies, and TV shows, including the classic film Spartacus, 1960, and Gladiator, 2000. The concept of modern combat sports, such as boxing and MMA, can trace their roots back to the Roman love of organized combat. While the days of real gladiators are long gone, their image as warriors of the arena endures. Their legacy is one of violence, spectacle, and endurance, a reminder of a time when life and death played out before an audience of thousands. The fall of the gladiator games was not caused by a single event, but rather by a combination of factors. The economic collapse of Rome made the games too expensive. Chariot racing became more popular, drawing away audiences. Christianity spread, condemning the games as inhumane and sinful. The Western Roman Empire fell, leading to the destruction and abandonment of its greatest arenas. What was once the centerpiece of Roman entertainment became nothing more than a memory, a relic of a bloodthirsty past. But though the roar of the Colosseum has faded, the legend of the gladiators remains immortal, a testament to Rome's brutal, fascinating, and complex history. The story of the gladiators is one of brutality, resilience, and spectacle, a reflection of the Roman world itself. For centuries, the gladiatorial games captivated audiences, providing thrilling combat, grand displays of power, and moments of unforgettable heroism. From their origins in funeral rites to the elaborate battles of the Colosseum, gladiators were more than just fighters. They were symbols of Roman ideals, strength, endurance, and discipline. Some were slaves, forced into combat with no choice but to fight. Others were volunteers, drawn by the promise of glory and gold. A few became legends, their names echoing through history. But as Rome changed, so did its values. The very empire that had built its greatest amphitheaters abandoned them, leaving the Colosseum and its counterparts to crumble into ruins. Economic decline, changing tastes, and the rise of Christianity all played a role in bringing an end to the games. What was once a celebration of death became a condemned relic of a past era. Yet, despite their end, the gladiators' legacy lives on. They remain one of the most enduring symbols of ancient Rome, immortalized in books, films, and modern combat sports. Their story is one of both tragedy and triumph, a testament to the resilience of those who fought, not just to entertain, but to survive. And so, as we step out of the blood-stained sands of the arena and back into the present, the echoes of the past still linger. The Colosseum, though silent, still stands, a reminder of a time when life and death played out before thousands, and when men became legends, warriors, and martyrs of the Roman Empire. The games may be over, but the gladiators will never be forgotten.